Excellent. So as part of the FAR technology strategy, we've been running combine workshops for the last 2 years. This involves a very generous grower of hosting one of these events, and also very kind growers bringing their combines of different ages, types, shapes and sizes, and also fronts to these events. What we do is we then bring in some experts from Canada and Australia. These guys been working on combine performance for about 20 or 30 years, some of them. So they've got a lot of experience in that area. So they share their insights, but they also encourage the growers as well to share their experiences as well with combines. And that point is really key. It's a two-way conversation. It's not just them preaching, it's the growers sharing their experiences as well. So today I'll give you an overview of the combine clinics and also look at some of the in-field work we've done since then, just looking how some of the changes growers have made have actually had an impact on their bottom lines, etc. So the clinics themselves, they run for about 6 or 7 hours for anybody who hasn't been to one. And what it is that first of all, the guys start off, they give you an overview of the combines themselves, looking at different parts of the combine, potential areas where you can actually increase performance. Probably the main area of focus is they're looking at the threshing mechanism. They want to make sure that your concaves and your rotors and drums are all square. And what that means is you've got the same distance from side to side, backwards and forwards, etc. So your crop's flowing through the machine really well. So the guys just run through the machines from front to back, just looking at areas where potentially you might have areas you can change. They also talk to the growers there. These guys know the machines inside out, but they don't know our conditions. Our growers know our conditions better. So the growers sort of tell them about what they've tried, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and also just sort of what the challenges are. And between them, they sort of try and shape a solution, as it were. Once we've gone through the machines as well, we then start looking at losses, measuring losses. This is probably the key critical part of the whole thing, analysing those losses, looking at those losses, where do those losses come from, how do you check different parts of the machine to see what you're losing on different areas. So we spend quite a bit of time on looking at that. They then break out into the different brands. These guys are all independent of the different companies. None of them work for John Deere, Case, etc. So we've broken down, generally in the last 4 years, has been Case, New Holland, John Deere, and Class machines at all the different events. And so we've had the experts break down into those different groups. And then they talk to the growers about sort of the idiosyncrasies of their different machines, etc. And it's more relative to what those growers are having. So they can say, well, actually, my John Deere, whatever, has got issues with this. And the guys can actually look at those problems and just show them areas that are more appropriate for what's going on their machine. We then all come back together at the end of the day, start looking at the grain tank itself, what's going on in the tank, looking at correct grain, where you potentially could be getting correct grains from, looking at MOG in the sample. MOG is material other than grain. And also for grass seeds, in the areas where we've grown grass seeds, we look at the quality of the seed as well, the implications of having too much rubbish in your sample for field stress losses. These in-field clinics are then followed by harvest visits. This year we visited 112 growers. Last year we visited about 65. The weather was against us this year, so we managed to actually, where we couldn't go out in the paddock and do some measurements, we actually spent a bit more time with the growers themselves, looking at their machines and actually seeing what's going on. It's quite interesting. Sometimes you go to a machine and look at the two experts, they'll be looking at each other, think something's wrong with this one. They're looking at each other and not saying anything, but they got to a solution with most of them. This year we had about 240 people in total come to the events. Last year we had about 220. The big thing here is 90% of the people who are attending these events are the growers themselves. They're all farmers. We covered about 69,000 hectares this year and about 64,000 hectares worth of crops the previous year. So at these events, at the end of the day, we give out a questionnaire just so we get some feedback so we can improve the courses as we move forward. And we have various questions in there we ask the growers. And also if they want us to visit them, so we try and visit as many as we possibly can. But I thought this was quite a really good question. This is to what extent has the workshop changed how you measure harvest losses? And we've got 99% of the people attending it were going to make a change from what they saw at the workshops and what they've learned, which I thought was absolutely awesome. I mean, I'd like to think as well that the 1% who weren't going to do anything were already doing that measuring already. So the full survey is actually something we probably could put on the website actually, so the growers can actually see, you can all see what the questions were and what the answers are. So how to measure? This is pretty much the crucial point of everything we do in these workshops. You can either make your own pan, like these ones here on the left-hand side, or you can improvise, like this one down here at the bottom, which is actually off a beehive, the top off a beehive. The grower is using that to actually measure his grain. But what you need to know is you need to know the size of that pan, and then once you know that sort of square meterage of that pan, you can then work it out from that what losses are. You can also buy commercially available pans like these ones, the shear grain or the bushel plus. These have got magnets on them, and they actually sit on the combine, and you press a button and they drop down. It's a bit of a safer way of doing things. But once you've got your sample, you then have to clean out all the mog, all the material from the grain, and then you have to measure how much grain's coming out of the machine from that particular part. Once you know what your losses are, you then use an app to actually work out what you're losing out the back, quantify what you're losing. This is a free app here you can get. This is all available on the FAR website. There are resources on this bit about how to make your pans, etc. Or you can actually when you buy one of these commercial pans, you can actually get an app with that. The good thing about these apps, the commercial, they do cost you money, but they actually records and it saves all the data, so you can put in all your different combine settings for your different crops, etc., and what your losses were in those crops. So that's a good point of reference to go back to, so that's really good. Another thing you can do is once you've got your combine set up nicely, you've got your thresholds, okay, and my losses are good, you can do like on this pan here, you can put lines on the corners of the pan. That's barley, that's canola, and that's actually wheat up there. So once you know what your acceptable losses are, anything that's below that line, you know you're good to go. So that means you can keep on doing pan drops throughout the day. You don't have to go through the whole rigmarole, the whole process. You can actually only have to worry about that if the grain ever goes over that line. So that's a really quick, smart way of checking and keeping an eye on throughout the day of what's going on. So part of the process, obviously, measurement as a foundation for management. You can't manage what you don't measure. So it's so important to keep on measuring as you're going with your crop. You need to measure at different parts of the combine, what's going on. So you need to measure from the front, what your losses are off the front, measure what's coming off the drum with the straw. That's sort of grain that's actually caught up and taken out the back of the machine with the straw, so you're not getting the separation. Measure what's coming off the sieves, and very important, measure and calibrate your loss monitors. So once you know what's coming out the back, set your loss monitors up for that. That's so crucial. And when you do make an adjustment, just do one adjustment at a time, because if you do more than one, obviously you can counter. One could have a big impact, another one could negate that. So you're better off doing one adjustment at a time. And the guys always said, when you do make a change, go extreme, because if you do little increments, it could take you a long, long time to actually get up to the right point. So if you make big jumps, you can zoom in onto that sweet area a lot quicker. So this is just an example of a systematic approach to the protocol. Oops, they're giving it all away there. So we went to go and see this grower. This was near the end of his harvest. It was in his last barley paddock. It was flat, and it was a real struggle for him. He knew he was losing a lot of grain out the back with his straw, but he didn't have a pan. He wasn't measuring. He couldn't quantify it. So what we did, we dropped some pans out and saw he was losing about 640 kgs out the back of the machine, which is a colossal amount of grain to be losing. He then increased his rotor speed, his drum speed, and he got that down to 400 kgs, which is getting in the right direction, but it's still significantly more than he wanted to. So then we tried opening up his concave. So what that does, opening up the concave, it means you don't break the straw up so much, which means you can get the grain to separate out. It's easier, if you think of a piece of straw, it's easier to get grain out of a longer piece of straw than it is out of a mat of straw. So we opened up his concave, and you can see we knocked the losses down to 225 kgs a hectare, which is great. We thought, well, if opening up the concave does that, let's just try closing it, see what that does. So we closed it, and wow, losses went back up again, so we thought, well, that's a bad idea. So we then set it back up the concave to the actual space gap we had before, where we had 225. And then we just played around a bit with his speed, got him down. He was going about 3.5 kg, 3.5 kilometers an hour when we got there. And we got him down to about 3 kilometers an hour, and his losses down to 100 kgs a hectare. It was still a lot, but in those conditions and that crop, he just wanted to get that crop off and out the way. And he's prepared from where he started off. He'd actually made a saving of $245 a hectare on those adjustments alone. So that's a really good example of that systematically changing things to find out where the sweet spot is. Another example here is a member of the audience His a Wairarapa farm, mixed driver, they're in Bali. He had really minimal losses. He had about 0.2% losses on his machine. He was going 3.8 kilometers an hour. So what we did was we got him to increase up to 5.4 kilometers an hour, and the losses pretty much didn't change. But you can see, obviously, the cost per hour running the machine decreased significantly. We then thought, right, let's go up to 6.5K, see what that does. And of course, we overcooked it, and the losses went back up again. And we gradually came back again, but we found the sweet spot was roughly between 5.5, 5.4 kilometers an hour. So it's a really good example of just using the pans, finding a sweet spot. If your combine set up well, you can still actually make increases in productivity. In this case, Mick increased their productivity about 30%. And that's just opportunities. That's more time you've got out there covering more hectares. And at $750 roughly an hour combine costs, that's a significant saving. Another example here, this is Earl Woolsford. He sent me this data, which is quite cool. He was in red clover. He's concentrated at first, getting the sample, getting a nice sample in the tank, got a great sample. Then he started dropping pans to see what's coming out the back. And he was losing 180 kilos out the back, which is $10-ish a kg. That's a lot of money. So Earl then started playing around with the pans, changed the sieve settings, changed the wind settings, etc., fine-tuned it, and got it down to about 55 kgs. His losses were down to 55 kgs, which is much better, but it's still a lot coming out the back of the machine. As he's got a case machine, he can change the modules in it, changing the threshing. So he then sort of started playing around with the threshing modules. Again, every time he changed something, he was measuring. And he managed to get those losses down to 5 kgs in the end. So it's a massive drop from 180 down to 5 kgs. And that equated to $1,800, over $1,800 a hectare saving he had by actually making those adjustments. So it just goes to show you how you can actually sort of use simple things like pans to actually just monitor what you're doing and measure what you're doing. Another financial impact analysis. This is Roscoe Taggart. Roscoe was used to a straw walker machine. He just bought a second machine, a second-hand rotary machine. When they were going out there, Brett, one of the expert guys, went out there. They had a look at the machine. They weren't happy with what it was doing. They decided to open up the concave until they started seeing 1 or 2 grains just on the back of the straw, coming out in the back in the straw. And once they saw that, they then closed the concaves up just 1 millimeter, and that actually took a lot off the engine load off the machine itself. They also dropped the drum speed, dropped the rotor speed, and because of that extra capacity they then had in the machine, they're able to increase his speed, his productivity by 60%. And so not only was he actually sort of covering more area, he was doing it using less power. And Roscoe reckoned that equated to his litres per hectare went down from 38 litres down to 26. So he had a 30% saving in fuel. And his output, so not only is he saving fuel, his actual output went up from 40 tonnes to 50 to 55 tonnes an hour. So that's a 20-25% increase in output using less fuel, which is awesome. Another area of it to look at with the combines and what they've been doing, the growers, is looking at extending the life of equipment. This is Craig Whiteside, down in Southland. He was actually doing a lot of work with us. The thing that was limiting Craig was his losses. He knew what his losses was. He was measuring his losses, but he couldn't get his productivity beyond a certain point. And so Murray Skaman, the New Holland expert, went out there. They pulled a few wires out the concaves, etc., and he managed to get his tonnage up to 55 tonnes an hour, and he stayed within his threshold, his losses threshold, which is awesome. That's an increase in performance of about 30%. And Craig reckons that probably saved him about 70 hours off a harvest. You ask any farmer if he wanted to take 70 hours off your harvest, what would you do for that? And without having to change your machine, that's gold. Second year, he did the same thing, did some more work, and he's found he's continued to see reduced losses at the back of his machine by measuring as he's going and also increasing his workload. So if you can get more capacity out of your machine, it does beg the question, why upgrade, why change the machine? Do you need to change the machine? If the capacity was the reason you were doing it, then you don't really need to. Final example here is Paul Johnson. Paul's over the Timaru area. He actually attended the courses, the combine workshops on both the first and second year, and he said he actually got a lot more out the second year than he did out the first. He said it's probably information overload the first year, and the second year he started actually making adjustments, making changes from what he was actually sort of hearing at the course. And Brett went to go and see him. They were playing, experimenting with different modules, looking at different scenarios, etc. And consistently, Paul's now getting a 10 to 15% drop in engine load, which relates to sort of fuel consumptions, and getting a 50% increase in capacity as well from the changes he's made. And these are in bigger crops than he's historically had. He said he's into 14, 15 ton crops where historically he's had less. So he's actually increased his output in bigger, heavier crops, which is awesome. Grass seed losses, he's said from changes he's made and measuring what he's doing, he's got his grass seed losses down from 20 down to 10%. So he was sent off 32 tons to the dressing plant and got 30-ton machine dressed grade seed come back, which is awesome. Barley losses, his barley losses were pretty low, but it's all relative. By using different concaves and experimenting, he's managed to get his losses down to pretty much nothing out the back of his machine. And also by experimenting with using different concaves, etc., he's been able to go into higher moisture conditions, harvest when he historically hasn't been able to harvest, which has meant not only is he getting more out of his windows of opportunity, he's actually extending his windows of opportunity. Overall, he's gained a greater understanding of how the machine impacts his sample and his losses. Another area we started to look at a little bit more this year was seed quality. This is another question we had on the questionnaire. How many growers are looking at crop quality? And 83% of them are looking by eye. But it's very hard to judge by eye how good your sample is. John McCaw here is giving out buckets. Barenberg have got the same principle as well. If you have a known volume and you can weigh what seed you've got in that volume, then that'll give you a good indication of what your seed quality is like. Because seed weighs more than mog, weighs more than material. So I think the Barenberg one is 3 kilos. If a 10-litre bucket weighs 3 kilos, you've got about 15% field dressing losses in there. So if that bucket weighs less than that, that means you've got more rubbish in there. And if it weighs more, that means you've got a better quality sample. John himself, he's been doing Coxfoot for a fair time. His samples have fell below this year, down below 10% dressing losses. His historic losses have been between 15 and 18% for the last 3 years. And he credits his improvement to the harvester workshops. Not only that, but also just being able to make those changes and measuring what those changes are.
2 minutes.
2 minutes, cool. So, take-home messages here. You need to measure regularly, morning, noon, night, when your crop changes, when your conditions change, when you're changing variety. There's so many cases of people thinking, I've got the machine set up sweetly, I don't need to change again. We went to see another grower. He'd actually had some experts over from class, looked at his machine, got it set up perfectly the day before, so he thought it was great. We went out there, there's different paddock, different conditions, shook out, and there's a significant amount of barley coming out the back of the machine, so we then had to reset the combine up again. So keep measuring all the time. Check in the tank and check on the floor. So look at both at the same time. Look at the quality in the tank and what you're throwing out and where you're losing it as well. Is it off the front? Like a lot of the losses in maize are off the front, or is it out the back? The goal of the whole process is to keep those losses down and get that productivity up. And have a greater output from your windows of opportunity. If you can get that capacity up of your combines, you can make the most of that time you've got out there. As we all know, the weather's the biggest thing that's holds you back. And if you can beat the weather, if you can keep ahead of the weather by getting that productivity up, that's a really good win. And increased capacity can help keep your machines longer. You don't need to have that replacement policy. You don't need to change them so often. And this is quite an important one as well. By quantifying what's coming out of the back of the machine and knowing the cost of it, you can then make a management decision on whether you should start or you should stop combining. We went to see one grower who I won't mention. He was losing about 200 to 300 kgs of ryegrass out the back of his machine. We equated what that was costing him. But he said, it's been on the floor for 2 weeks. It's going to rain again tonight. If I don't get it today, it's going to cost me more than that. I've lost the whole lot. So he could quantify that decision because he knew what he was losing out the back. Final thing is treat harvest loss as a cost to your business. It's not just an opportunity, oh, I might have got that, might not have gone. It's a lost revenue coming out the back of the machine, and then once it's out the back of the machine, it goes from being a revenue to an expenditure because it's then a weed. Our final slide, we've set up these WhatsApp groups for the different makes of combine, and if anybody's not on one of these groups they want to join, feel free. They're absolutely awesome. They've been great grower feedback. There's about 220 odd growers on these different groups. Also, the experts are all on there as well, and so is the New Zealand machinery dealers. They're on there as well. So if somebody's got a crop they haven't been into before, they put what's the settings for clover, and somebody will come back and help them. If somebody's got an issue with something, they've been a really, really good sort of way of growers helping each other. And it's about the whole thing. It's all about knowledge sharing as much as anything else and measuring what you're doing. That's me. Questions?
Okay, a couple of quick questions. I know that people love talking about machinery, so. No, I don't believe you. I don't believe you haven't got a question about this.
Are you doing it again?
Yep, we'll be doing it again this year.
Yeah.
Were the factory loss settings any different, very different to what you were actually finding?
That's an awesome question, Nigel. What we found was that the factory settings are a good starting point most of the time, but then you've got to fine tune them. And that's probably some of the losses that people are getting. They're going, all right, barley, press it on the machine. Likewise with the modern machines, where they're actually adjusting themselves all the time. If you don't set those parameters up and only let them move a little bit, I think like one of the guys said, it's like letting a party animal out. They'll just go, way, and they'll just go all over the place unless you actually keep them under control, keep them tight. But yeah, the factory settings are a good starting point, but they are a starting point.
Okay.